Welcome to the High Classical period, and we're looking at the Acropolis, focusing on the architecture and the various sculptures. I love this image. It's a modern reconstruction of the Ionic frieze. And you can see the paint, right? I mean, this has been painted, and we want to again assume that this is what it would have looked like for the Athenians as well. So what we see now, you guys, is just kind of bare marble, bare stone, was actually really painted, which did make it easier, obviously, to be seen from ground below, right? So we want to always consider that factor when we look at this Ionic frieze. Before we look at some of the details, it's important for us to see the path of the procession and what direction was it going. So it would have started where I have the red star, and there's a grouping that's going northward, right? So from the west side head, so the direction is going upwards to the northern end, and this is the area where the horsemen are preparing. So you've got young boys who are getting ready to mount their horses. The marshals are gathering, kind of preparation for it, like the start of the procession, right, the start of the event. And then in the north side, as well as the south side, so they kind of echo each other. So at the same time, simultaneously, the groups that are headed to the purple era, which is kind of where everything culminates, where everything ends, where everything, kind of the most important part of it is. So on this north and south side, you have the horsemen, then you have chariots, elders, musicians, water jar carriers, tray bearers, and the victims. And the victims refer to the animals that are going to be sacrificed. And then finally, on the east side, we have the young maidens, right, the girls who've kind of been weaving the peplos. You have magistrates and heroes, and then you have the gods. And the gods are actually seated gods watching the procession come to a halt. And that happens where that purple triangle is, and it says peplos incident. That's where the peplos will be kind of brought out and ready to be offered to Athena. So the frieze runs all the way around, right, in this inner section of it on the Ionic frieze. And when you are walking around it, as with the worshippers during the procession, as well as just up on the Acropolis, their movements and their activities are basically mimicked on the Parthenon frieze. This is the area, as you can see, where the riders are preparing to mount their horses. It is a detail that comes to us from the west side of the Ionic frieze. And then as we start to head towards the eastern side, we are now seeing the horsemen, right? So we saw them getting on the horses, and now we see them. And you guys, here you want to look at the movement. I mean, these guys are in motion. It's very dynamic, it's active, and it's echoing the movement of the citizens down on the Acropolis, right, that are around the Parthenon, that are admiring Athena, that are preparing to give her her new garment. So this very powerful portrayal of action. Now remember, you guys, this depicts the Athenians themselves. It is the first time we have the normal people, right, not the gods, that are represented on a temple. So this speaks about the power they thought they had. This speaks about that special relationship that we mentioned. All of that comes together on the Ionic frieze. I wanted to show you kind of a broader perspective of these horses, right? The guys on horses, the horsemen. The cavalcade is another way to call that. So you see these here again, the activity, the motion, the energy is definitely clear. Here's what we want to consider, that if there is indeed a Persian war reference. Now we know the Parthenon was a victory monument and a memorial, a war memorial. And there are a few historians who suggest that possibly this is not the Panathenaic procession that's depicted, but rather that it might be the Persian War. And so what John Boardman, who's one of the guys who proposes this, he says that there are 192 horsemen that are represented, and there were 192 Athenians who died at the Battle of Marathon. That's another really big battle, and in that battle the Athenians did defeat the invading Persians. So his suggestion is that, well, this is meant to honor those 192 warriors who gave their lives. But the problem with that interpretation is that the battle only involved the Athenian infantry, okay, which we don't see, which is absent from the frieze. So could it be that? But if it is, then why are these guys on horses? Well, what John Boardman says, right, the guy who originated this theory, he says, well, the Marathon dead, right, the ones who died at the Battle of Marathon, are depicted here on horses in order to make them more heroic. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? What do you think? So, one suggestion there. There's also another possibility about these horsemen on the Parthenon, that it's connected to Athena's connection and ability of like taming of horses. So again, is this plausible? Yes, there's good suggestions for it, and Boardman does account for why these are not infantrymen. However, most historians now do support the idea that this is a Panathenaic procession. As you can see here with the ground plan where the arrows are pointing, they would also take up some sacrificial animals up with them, right? That's why the Propolia had to be pretty open. So here you've got some of them coming in for a sacrifice. And there's a Propolia, right? It had to have those innermost columns spaced further apart to enable the bigger animals and the chariots and the people to be able to walk through comfortably. As we get closer to the Peplos incident, that Peplos moment, we have on these corners of the east side of the frieze, the elders and the maidens coming together. And finally, we'll be able to see the gods seated and watching the spectacle going on. And here they are, gods and goddesses, right near the Peplos incident. And so these ones have been identified as Poseidon, Apollo, Artemis, Aphrodite, and Eros. Now, Aphrodite, in a very interesting maneuver, has her left arm kind of across Eros' shoulder, and she's basically pointing to that middle activity, the Peplos. And I guess here's the big deal here. The gods are not taking part in the activity except as passive observers. They're discussing it. It's like they're at a show and they're talking about it, right? Apollo turns to Poseidon, says something about it, or Aphrodite's pointing something out to Eros. So we're seeing this idea that gods are spectators. Gods are watching the Athenians. Imagine what that means. The gods are watching the Athenians. Right? They're conversing with one another about the Athenians. This is really important to understand, once again, the Athenian self-perception around this time that this is Parthenon is being built. This slide shows some more images of the seated deities watching the event. The one on the bottom is already the one that you guys have seen. And then if we want to try to kind of put these together, we'll see an example of what it totally could have looked like. And so there it is, right? The gods seated, about to observe and talk about what is going on. And finally, we arrive in the East Ionic frieze, right there in the middle, where the Peplos moment, the Peplos incident is taking place. And you can see the garment taken out, right, as a fold, and they're probably going to unravel it, about to give it to the statue of Athena. And once you finally enter into the Parthenon temple, this is what you will find. This actually is a reconstruction of it in the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, because the original has been lost. And on the right side, I love this image because you get a sense of the drama and the impact of actually walking in and encountering this 38 feet tall sculpture of your patron goddess. And you can see this is why the Parthenon had to be quite big, because this is what it needed to house. And you can see on the right side these double layers of the Doric columns, right? So real extensions and making it much taller. And the impact is just jaw-dropping. Alright, so let's look at some of these points about this Athena Parthenos. The sculptor is Phidias, and he is the overseer of the entire project here on the Acropolis. Now, even though we don't know the original, we don't have the original, how do we know what it looked like, right? Well, we know the iconography because it's been described by Greek travelers, including Pausanias in the 2nd century AD. We also have smaller versions of this one. We have other Latin authors and even Roman copies of it. So we have a lot of people actually talking about it. This is a pretty significant work of art. They're either talking about it or making smaller marble copies of it. So we do have information in that way. Now let's look at her attributes and what those represent. She is represented as a goddess of war, which is very appropriate, right? Because this is the Parthenon that is meant to be a victory monument, a war memorial, and a votive offering to Athena. So her aspect as a goddess of war is what is highlighted in the sculpture. Now that's also further reinforced by some of the carvings. Her shield, for example, has a carving of the Battle of the Gods and the Giants, as well as the Greeks and the Amazons. So you're seeing an echo on the shield inside the Parthenon with what's outside on the Doric frieze of the exterior, right? Now, other attributes here, she's got the spear, she has the helmet, she's also holding a statue of Nike, victory, in the palm of her hand, which is obviously a reference to the Persian battles, but also the whole idea of the Greeks bringing about order and civilization to chaos and barbarism, right? That's really, really important to think about. Now, when we look at her formal elements and what those mean, I'm now on the third bullet here. Well, first of all, she has a very architectural quality, which is very appropriate, right, for a temple of this type. Okay, so an architectural quality. Now, why is that important? Besides the fact that she's in a pretty impressive architectural piece, but it emphasizes her role as a warrior. She stands upright and firm and very vertical, right? The verticality is definitely emphasized. She is a protector of the city-state. Okay, you also notice, hopefully, now, Polyclitus's ratio of 1 to 7 is also valid here. That's also what Phidias has chosen to represent his Athena. Okay, so you've got this totally firm, static, powerful, massive, solid form. So it's perfect for an object of devotion. So when we talk about the formal elements, like what does it look like, right? She's vertical, she's idealized, she's symmetrically created, she's static. There's really not a narrative. It's just she's represented as a goddess of war. Well, all of those are perfect because the meaning of this is what? She's an object of devotion. You are meant to just go and be awed by her presence. It's not meant to tell kind of a story as, maybe the birth of Athena pediment does, or the contest between Athena and Poseidon. Those are the stories and narratives that are told. But here she is an object of devotion. And with all of that, she does then become a civic and religious symbol. She personifies Athenian identity, right? Their values, what they thought of themselves, what they thought about the gods and goddesses, how they related to them. So all of that comes together in this one powerful sculpture. But something begins to change. About 27 years later than what we were just looking at, this sculpture of a goddess is created. Now, I really want you to stop the video and begin a writing activity. This is another one of those free writing activities. Describe how she's represented in as much detail as you possibly can. I mean, look at it, and then look at it again, and look at it again, and again, and write as much as you can, uninhibited, do not pause, all for 2 minutes. And I have the left image there of the Temple of Athena Nike because that's where this sculptural relief would have been located. Okay, so what did you come up with? What you're looking at is Nike adjusting her sandal. We know it's Nike because we have the reference to the wings in the back. She's in quite an awkward gesture, right? I mean, she's kind of probably mid-action, maybe running or walking somewhere, and kind of has paused, lifted up her right leg to be able to adjust her sandal. If you look at her drapery, right, those garments that she's wearing, they cling to her. They're very beautiful, and they do highlight the body underneath it, right? So the idea of a drapery that reveals and conceals the body, that's very much something that's visible here. But how would you describe her pose, this posture? Some of us think she looks very unstable, uncertain, unpredictable, maybe even fragile, would you say? Awkward, unbalanced, vulnerable. I mean, all of these might be words that might have come up as you were describing it. But we have to ask, why? I mean, we just talked about Athena Parthenos, right? We've just discussed her. And then several years later, we have another image of a goddess adjusting her sandal. These kinds of things, you guys, when this stuff happens in art history, we have to ask why. Where is this coming from? What is happening that is creating a very different representation of a goddess? Now again, guys, it's not the same goddess we're representing. I want to make that clear, right? With Athena Parthenos, we do have Nike as victory in the palm of her hand, right, with those powerful gold wings. But in our sculptural relief on the right, something different is going on. She's adjusting her sandal. What a human activity to do, right? She's not this victorious figure flying in and declaring victory, but she's doing such a human activity. So let's think about that a little bit more. Why is this how this is represented? Two key historical events could help us understand this change in the sculpture relief on the Acropolis. First of all, the Peloponnesian War. So Athens, which had been the strongest city-state in Greece, now is fighting the Peloponnesian League that's led by Sparta. Well, look at that. Look how long this war takes. And it ends with the complete defeat of Athens. The city is subjugated to Sparta. The cultural ideals of Pericles just collapse. Even historians tell us that it was a moment of hopelessness and a lack of confidence. There's a decay of idealism. Everything they thought was now shattered. Man could not perfect and impose order on the environment anymore. Such a drastic change from what they had believed. Now, many say that the reason Sparta actually won in the Peloponnesian War is because Athens was also going through a plague. So, the summer of 430 BC, a devastating plague struck Athens. It killed Pericles, their beloved leader, and it's suggested that about 1/3 of the city's population was also falling victim to this. And some historians describe it as a city had all these funeral pieces everywhere, and it was just this blow to their society. It was chaos, what they did not know, right? They didn't know chaos. They thought they could order everything. But now it was a moment of chaos, and they couldn't create order. They were not in control. This plague shocked them so much that they were just in this utter hopeless state. The social fabric fell apart. People just were doing whatever they were doing because they thought, well, I'm going to die anyway, right? What's the point? So the social order, the moral order, everything began to fall apart. And it's in that context that this sculpture is created. So when we try to understand it, what do we say? Well, we look at the backdrop, the Peloponnesian War and the plague. And it seems like the beauty of this piece, because it is very beautiful, very sensual, right? The way the drapery is kind of, clinging to her body. So the suggestion is by historians that it masks reality, right? The prettiness of art, the beauty of art is used to mask reality. So art becomes a way to hide the horrors that are really experienced. Now, another way to look at that is that it's an escapist activity, right? It denies the horrors of war. They can kind of withdraw from that horrific moment that they're living in. Another way to look at this is that Athenians felt that victory, which is Nike, right, lingered a little too long. It didn't come to save them, right? Victory was not on the horizon. So the love of all things gods and goddesses now is falling apart. They're not these, invincible, powerful beings. Now they're just like us. Now they're human, and they do human activities, and they take a little too long to show up and help the Athenians.